topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Park. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Park's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyapark.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyapark.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Park.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here with y'all. And what I want to share is a really cool story that happened recently, and it goes back to our kindness circle. So as we all are human beings and we all make mistakes. I don't know about you, but I definitely make mistakes every day. So with one of my team members, I thought that when we were talking, they were good. But then after the conversation, I had an inkling that the conversation we had had, the feedback I had provided, may not have set well with them. So for me, it's important to be there for someone. The work is critical. The work and business keep the lights on in everybody's home, and yet people come first. So I reached out and I shared that, let's have a 5-minute conversation. And we were just talking in general, and I opened up this space, and it was amazing how that person shared back with me as to what did not sit well with them. And what I want to go back from this kindness story, and what I want to share with you is that they were very kind in understanding that I was a human being and that it was just a misunderstanding. So many times what happens is that we assume things. So it's important to have that open communication, and kindness also includes having those tough conversations, because kindness is not just going and doing an act. Kindness is also about sitting down and stepping into the discomfort zone and asking people okay, let's clarify, let's bring things out in the open. Otherwise, what happens is that there may be a little wound that can become a boil. So you don't want to let that happen. So just wanted to share that story with y'all. And thank you for everyone who have gotten books. We really appreciate you, because those books, Expert to Influencer and Entrepreneur's Garden, will change your life, because I can share with you, it's not because these are our books, because I've heard back from readers, and also it's going to change other people's lives, because we do share out part of the profit with kiva.org. So I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for your support and making our show possible. Let's invite our guest in. Welcome, Stefan.
Hey, nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time and being open to sharing your thoughts and experience. So usually we start out in the childhood. Do you have any positive memory from your childhood where it was a person or a situation or an event that left a positive mark on you?
I remember, it's a funny story. Yeah? I remember that my mom picked me up from school when I was like a 6-year-old kid. And I think we were locked out of the house because she had forgotten the key. And we also had picked up my sister, which was a little bit younger. She was in the kindergarten. And my father, he was traveling for professional reasons and no way to enter the house. And then my mom was going like, well, what do we do? Yeah. She went to a telephone cabin. I mean, cell phones didn't exist back then. She called up a friend in Munich, and asked her if he could stay the weekend with her because we couldn't go inside the house, into our house. Yeah, and there we were, and ended up in Munich, and that's the first time I got into Munich's beautiful opera.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a beautiful
So
story.
that was a big story, and how to approach life basically from my mom. She always was like, if something doesn't work, you do the next better thing instead of the next worse one. You do the next better one. Yeah, that was my mom. Yeah, good lesson.
Very resourceful and insightful. So as you grew up, did you have any interests just like any other kids, or your interests were different?
I guess
Education, sports,
yeah,
anything.
I guess I was a very avid reader, and at home we used to have thousands of books, and I really enjoyed reading. And we had a few different national and international newspapers at home. I guess I also had the luck to be able to travel a lot with my parents at a young age, and I was big time into sports. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So what would you say, like, you did a lot of different things, sports and traveling and reading. So reading and traveling has been one of my favorite things, as well as sports. What would you say that each of the things taught you a lesson that has stayed with you even till today?
Mm. The sports, perhaps if we start with sports, sport was, I think, important because you learn to move and manage your body. Yeah? And if you do that at a competitive level, I think it's important that you learn to compete in life somewhere. It doesn't matter where. Can be a good violinist player, or do whatever you like. Yeah. But learning to compete at some level, I think, is an important lesson. I managed to get this in sports in 2 or 3 disciplines, which certainly built me to a degree, because once you've figured out how you compete in one area and how you get good in one area, you just replicate the same process. I think reading has absolutely been critical because it builds knowledge, and that thirst for discovery and experiences and learning, which I had, brought me to live in many countries. So today I live in Zurich in Switzerland, which happens to be my 14th country. That led me to explore very different fields, to read literally thousands of books, to eventually write 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah, I think these very important stories. And last but not least, traveling is a way. I mean, unless you just go for beach travels, if you really travel to explore the world, you get to know the world. And this makes me feel comfortable today that I have seen so many different areas of the world, both rich and poor, lived in different countries, managed to see so many different places, which was uniquely enriching. And definitely opened me big time for this world.
And between these travels and between playing sports, tell us, like, where did your career interest take you?
My career interest, I got started with computers relatively early, which raised my curiosity, and then eventually started selling computers when I was like a 15-year-old kid. And when I was 17, so that was back in 1998, I was joining a first startup, instead of going to school. That was basically my history, and then it went on from there.
Well, that's fantastic. Tell us about that's amazing. A 15-year-old, I can just kind of imagine you walking down and working with the computers. And there's so many young entrepreneurs out there who think that college is the only route to take. The key is that it's knowing about yourself. So how did you know that's what you wanted to do, that you wanted to have a startup at that young of an age?
Actually, I wasn't sure, to be honest. I think You can do a lot of thinking, but in the end, if you haven't been to that place, it's unlikely you figure that out by just thinking. So I would definitely welcome and invite you to explore and to test more. Unless you try it out yourself, you will never know if it's your shoe size and if it fits you and if it feels good. Yeah. So that startup, I just got involved in there. It was a fantastic experience for me, but I didn't know that was a good one before I was there. Yeah. And repeatedly in my life, I've been thinking hard about certain things. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong. Some things you simply have to try and to do. Yeah. And you can't foresee how they eventually end up if you haven't been there yet. Yeah.
Absolutely. You bring home a really good point that you just can't know everything for sure. It's about being open to failing, and it's about being open to experimenting, because that's what all science and innovation is about. So tell us, like, what was your startup about, and were you the only one, or did you have a group of other people? And what was your journey like through that?
Let me actually comment on the point you just made. I remember having read a long blog article from Clayton Christensen at some point in time. And Clayton Christensen was that famous Harvard professor, and he wrote various books, and he opened several companies, etc. And so you eventually believe that this is one of the most successful human beings out there, having, Harvard, several books, several successful companies, etc. And in that blog article, he really analyzed step by step what he did in his life. And he came to the conclusion that 80% of everything he tried eventually failed. Yeah. And he goes through his life story, and he goes like, well, I wanted to do journalism. I applied at Chicago Tribune and then New York Post, etc. They didn't take me. They rejected me, etc. And it's amazing that one of the most successful people eventually came to the conclusion that most of the things he did in life eventually failed. And actually, the more you try, the more you're going to fail, but the more big wins you're going to have. And that story from Clayton Christensen inspired me to look at my own track record and see what actually failed and what went well. And also I have to acknowledge that many things eventually failed, but this is part of life. Unless you choose a very stable career and work in the post office from day one till you're 65 till you retire, you're going to make errors. And the more you experiment, the more errors you're going to make, but the more big wins you're going to take home.
Absolutely. And there is the joy of taking big win homes. So here's also I want to like touch upon what you mentioned is that the more you try, the more you're going to fail. And it's a perspective. The way I see it is that the more you fail, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the more you grow, and the more deeper your capacity gets, the more your depth you have, then you are able to perform at a higher level. So it brings its own things. So tell us a little bit about your startup experience and how long did that last?
Well, that was a very early startup experience. I was like 18 when it all started, or 17, I think. And basically the idea back then, search engines, at least the Googles, etc., didn't exist back then. It was Yahoo and Alta Vista, etc. And we were basically, the central idea was building a local internet catalog similar to what Yahoo and Alta Vista have been, but next to offering global information about general worldly things, we would offer local information, like who is the car dealer in your city, what is happening in the cinema in your city, etc. These kind of information. I think that was the pivotal idea. And from a business perspective, that dramatically changed the revenue model, because suddenly local stores made sense for them to advertise locally. Yeah, so totally new revenue streams as opposed to the big search engines. And that went on quite well. We got a few patents. We got supported from Sun Microsystems, which existed still back then and was a big player. Got international eventually, but crashed in the .com crash like many other companies. Nevertheless, a part of the technology survived and was successfully sold on to another one of the big corporates. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Because as young as you were, you experimented it and you were able to move it forward to success. What would you say were your key learnings? Because there's so many of our bright youngsters, especially Gen Z, they're so self-starters. And of course, every generation is pointing out like, oh, Gen Z can be like this, Gen Z can be like that. One of the things that I really appreciate about them is that they're self-starters. So there are a lot of youngsters out there thinking, oh, I want to do my startup. I want to go ahead and start this. What would you say would be few lessons that they need to keep in mind as they're thinking about it?
Well, this is very much the topic of my book, How to Create Innovation. It's a book we have authored based on a ton of research. And in the end, I think most importantly, and particularly young people like to believe, hey, this is my startup. It's unique. We are doing this. And it has a very special angle and therefore it's special. But this is wrong. I mean, by far, most parts in a business are similar and have been done before. So rely on best practices, rely on approaches, on methodologies and tools which are proven in the marketplace, and use those, because you don't have to reinvent the world. 90% of a business model should remain absolutely the same without changes. So copy and paste wherever you can and focus on the few things. These are very few things, normally 2 to 5% of an organization, which are truly differentiating, where your business model is different. And this is where you have to reinvent the wheel. For the rest, rely on strong processes and copy and paste wherever you can to reduce the amount of errors you're making, particularly as a young entrepreneur.
Very powerful. So what you're telling is that see and look at the businesses that are already established, that they're doing well, and how are they doing. So what would be the point of differentiation? You mentioned that there are 20% that's different from the rest of the market, because there's always, we talk about the fit to market and talking about unmet user needs. So how can it, it doesn't have to be just young entrepreneurs or young startup companies. How would they go about it?
Two different things. The first thing, let's talk about strategy execution. And basically, if you look at the processes and capabilities inside a firm, 80% of the processes or capabilities of a firm are non-core. That means they're not even industry specific. The way you do marketing, the way you do accounting, the way you do your HR, the way you do your forecasting, the way you do your technology and engineering, even most likely production, is not industry specific, most likely. And that means if 80% of your processes are not industry specific, it's unlikely that you should be innovating there. Quite on the opposite. This is where you should be standardizing and leveraging best and leading practices. This is where you copy and paste and just try to be as effective as possible with the least amount of investment. Only 20% is industry specific, and you're only differentiating with 2 to 5%. And these are the very few areas where you really invest in your differentiation, where you innovate with everything you got, where you launch product innovation, marketing innovation, etc. But the important message is, in the 80% of all processes and all capabilities of your firm, this is where you can save costs. This is where you should save costs. This is where you should be standardizing. Important lesson number one. The other topic you just raised, Divya, was understanding the customer needs. And this is what goes absolutely wrong out there. We are all working, we're doing our marketing, our product development, our sales always towards certain segments and towards certain personas. This is, and particularly for startups, often doesn't work well, because it's not about those segments. I mean, you got to know me now a little bit. I mean, Divya and I are talking now for a few minutes. So I have a very simple question, and the question is, do I go to a fancy restaurant tonight or to a bar? Yeah. And imagine you have all the information of the world about me. You have any marketing segmentation, any persona information you ever dreamed of. You have that about me, and you're not able to answer that question with any significant likelihood. Yeah. So now I give you just one additional piece of information. Yeah. So tonight I'm back in Paris. I'm meeting with my fellow students, which I've been studying with 15 years ago. And now I think it's relatively obvious. With that single information, you now know, oh, well, those guys are most likely going to the bar now, yeah, not to a fancy restaurant. Yeah. So, and as this example illustrates, personas and segments do not prescribe or do not describe well how somebody's going to act. Yeah, you have to understand really the important but unmet customer need. In this case, Stefan didn't go to a bar for whatever reasons. He did go to a bar to meet back his students, colleagues. So what we, as to improve the success rates as entrepreneurs or corporate innovators, we have to understand those deep, important, but unmet customer needs and stop working on personas and segmentation.
That is definitely a different way of thinking, because everywhere like you look, people are talking about ideal customer profile. People are talking about ideal customer avatar. So it's about what you're talking is going at a deeper level and understanding that what they're looking for and where is the area where the needs are not met. And then that's where you're bringing in the innovation.
Exactly. Because, I mean, Divya and I, we could go to the same bar, yeah, for very different reasons. Yeah. And we are from very different customer segments. Yeah. And Divya and I, we could be both purchasing candles for very different reasons. We are definitely not at all in the same segment. We would take a flight as well for very different reasons, but we're still not in the same segment. So you could go on and on. Basically, particularly if you're not in a well-established market, entirely forget personas and segmentation and really understand what the important need is somebody is having, what that important but unmet need is. There is an entire methodology around that, which is called Jobs to be Done. Have a look at it. It's extremely powerful. And 99% of the organizations out there fail. And what they do instead, and that is highly problematic, since they have no idea what that important but unmet customer need is, they go for ideation. So and ideation is, so they invent ideas. Yeah. A recent newspaper article was like, oh, let's go for 100 ideas for one to fly. Yeah. And ideation is simply a luck-based approach. You could as well play the lottery. It's simply unlikely that through ideation, you're going to find a startup idea that is inside the frame, that you can execute upon, that meets your differentiating capabilities, that is ahead of the competition, that meets an important but unmet customer need. So stop ideating. Yeah, I can't get over this. Yeah. That's one of the most important reasons why startups fail, because it's just so unlikely that you pick a winner out of 100 ideas. It's just so
You are pointing out something that might be counterintuitive to so many people in the industry. And as they're listening, they may be scratching their heads that without ideas, how is innovation possible? So tell us, like, okay, it's a concept is going to be there, but then from having that concept to building that proof of concept, what are one of the ways to go about where you're still maintaining innovation, where you're still reducing the odds of failure?
Perhaps it's best to talk about a case study. Yeah. So then it becomes a little bit practical. And so we have been working with one of the big chemical firms in the world, in agriculture, etc. And they wanted to penetrate the Asian market because the Asian markets are huge. Alone in India are 500 million farmers. I mean, that's a quantity unheard of, yeah? And similar in neighboring countries, extreme amounts of farmers, but nobody knew what these guys would need help with. So we studied basically a large job, a large challenge, which was how to succeed in the business of farming. That was the field of study.
Mm-hmm.
And so we strategically broke down each step the farmer had, from selecting the crops, working the field, watering the plants, eventually harvesting, then selling all the harvest. We strategically looked at all steps and broke this down even into more details until we had fully mapped out that entire process. And it was like, I think, close to 200 individual steps, yeah, from checking water levels to do we have enough pesticides against whatever animals, etc., who might be eating the crops. And then we checked with a mass survey. So we surveyed over 500 farmers in India, 200 farmers in Thailand, etc. We asked them, hey, are you actually successful with it, or are you struggling with this step? And based on that survey, we could really pinpoint what are they struggling with. And they haven't been struggling with water management, but they hugely struggled, for example, with selecting a crop that would yield good outcomes. I mean, good monetary outcomes for them in the end. That was, for example, one key insight for them. And once you have such a nugget, such an insight, yeah, and this is statistically proven that 500 farmers, yeah, or X% do have that issue, yeah, and it's monetary wise a big one for them, then you know exactly where you can innovate. And then innovation becomes almost, based on such an insight, becomes almost an engineering discipline. And believe me, companies are good at engineering, but they're really poor at identifying important but unmet customer needs.
So what I'm hearing, Stefan, this is brilliant, that when you're innovating, you are innovating, and yet what you're doing is that you're ensuring the success of it because you've gone down through each and every single step. You've done your market research, you have pinpointed exactly what are the areas that need to be either optimized or innovated or recreated, whatever it is. And having that information is like having the key to success. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. I think we need to mature in general the discipline of innovation so we have a chance at increasing the success rate. And for that, we need much stronger processes and we need to follow leading patterns. Ultimately, I believe that similar to many other fields, innovation can become much more of an engineering discipline with much higher success rates. It just can't be that 90% of all innovation initiatives out there fail, regardless if it's corporates or startups. We have to change that.
Mm-hmm. And that is really powerful. So now we have, let's say, our minimum viable product, where you know that you will have your proof of concept. So now, how do you take that? Not only build, but also you build it in such a way that you are able to scale. Because so many times what happens is that, especially startups or even mid-sized companies, they experience success, but they've not built in scaling in the processes and fundamentals and systems and operations. And then what happens is as they scale, the system starts falling apart. What advice would you have for our audience?
Okay, first of all, let's clarify briefly what a MVP is about, because an MVP is not a proof of concept anymore. A MVP is a quantitatively proven business formula that has worked in practice. People start confusing that because a proof of concept should happen before that. Yeah, MVP is there in real life, it works, and it works in practice, and it's quantitatively proven. Now, I think we have to differentiate thereafter in two scenarios. If it's a corporate or a startup, are two different cases. But in both cases, You have to mature all processes across the entire business model sufficiently, because as you grow, as you double in size, or as you 10x in size, you have to lift up any aspect of your business model. You have to improve your financials, your HR, your core processes, your marketing, etc., and so on. And this is usually where the shit, basically, where the fan hits the shit, where the shit hits the fan. Because
Okay.
some parts are left behind.
Mhm.
Not all things are scaled equally, but that is what ultimately needs to happen. What I would encourage you to do is, normally an organization has one main value stream, sometimes two, normally only one, and that main value stream can be depicted in a customer journey. So you do your customer journey, you map it out, but next to that customer journey, or under it in different swim lanes, you highlight everything that needs to happen internally. So what are the internal processes to back up and make this customer journey work? Which systems do you require? Which data is flowing? Which colleagues are working on which part? Which teams are working on which part? How is the customer getting feedback? So you not only map out the customer journey, but you map out basically the entire organization in different swim lanes, thereby rearranging and improving that single core value chain. That is, I think, the most important thing I would be doing, because this is where things fall apart. And for the rest, I mean, that's something I mentioned at the beginning. 80% is non-core. So in the non-core areas, such as, likely operations, accounting, shipping, etc., think about outsourcing, so you don't have to mature those processes. Outsource strategically to somebody who is really best in class.
Yeah, no, definitely. That makes sense, because we are going back to, again, that when you're doing the market research, when you're mapping out the customer journey, when you're doing the innovation, that you are bringing in the maturation. And so many people rush through that process. Like, okay, if it is working, it's good, let's just keep going. And what I'm hearing is that you're playing the long game versus thinking about the short term cost.
Oh, absolutely. I think the key error we have been making is to drive down costs in our innovation processes to the degree where an MVP is no more an MVP, but really a proof of concept, so no quantitative validation. And I mean, the problem started with the lean startup, if you want. We got
Yeah.
leaner and leaner, and we are still failing at 90%. I don't think we should be
Mhm.
failing at 90%. I think we should be spending more. We should get on top of our customers' important but unmet needs. We should target our innovation, build those strategically. And while, yes, it will be more expensive, it's not necessary to fail at 90%. If you're smart, you can probably get away with a 50% chances of failure, which is still high, but by factors better than what is currently out there. So I would really urge us to work on the investment security we are providing here. That costs a little bit more money, but that drastically improves the success rate.
No, I definitely agree with you. Is that so many times, and especially companies, with the quarter earning reportings, it's the whole culture that we have created is like, keeping the eye on the short term cost versus playing the long game. So, what would you say that even with all of these things and the way this whole evolution has happened in the corporate capitalism, what would you say are a couple of things, having worked with big giants like Amazon and Google, that have allowed them to stay on the map and sustain their success?
Let's pick perhaps Google as an example. And Google had that pivotal insight with a search engine which would work differently as opposed to the Yahoos and Alta Vistas, etc. That it would rank the authority, that it would measure the authority of a website and rank those pages with high authority higher, which was the central insight behind Google search engine. So they had one successful innovation, which would scale extremely well.
Mm.
But then they thought, well, okay, what do we do next? And at this point in time, that was a very exciting point in time, I remember. Google founded at some point in time Alphabet as a holding and came up with many more innovation in other business units to keep growing, to keep scaling, and to be able to continue its evolution. And this is, I think, how we need to think about innovation. No? It's not always doesn't need to happen within the same company, within the same structure. Rather think about a portfolio, and launch a series of innovative products, services, etc., similar to what Google has been doing.
Yeah, very powerful. So, Stefan, thank you so much for being open to kind of sharing your wisdom and bringing in insights. And I'm sure that our audience is definitely curious about your books, where they can connect with you, because I know that I'm going to look it up. Wealth of information and knowledge over here. So do share, where they can connect with you and where can they find your books, and tell us about your books as well.
Well, to briefly talk about the book, 90% of the innovation initiatives out there are failing, regardless if you're corporate or if you're a startup. And this led me to launching a research initiative now 7 years back. And basically for years, we were structurally researching better ways to doing innovation. So we looked at 270 post-mortems and really analyzed, why did they fail? Oh my goodness, and analyzed 70 pain points innovators were facing and strategically looked at how can these be overcome with better tools, better approaches, etc. And this is what we documented. We call them the UNITE models, in short for Understanding, Navigating, Innovation, Transformation Enterprises. The UNITE models today are the by far largest, deepest, and first integrated collection of models, frameworks, approaches, and canvases. So I think many of you will know the business model canvas. Think about 70 times the business model canvas and integrate it so you know how you go from elevator pitch to, important unmet need, to elevator pitch, to value proposition, to business model, to operating model, to organizational culture, to organizational structure, etc. These are the UNITE models. And I think the abstract got then published in a book, which is called How to Create Innovation, originally self-published. Now the leading publishers globally pick it up. It was just published by Wiley in the English-speaking world. And I think it's the first book that covers innovation end-to-end, that goes beyond individual piecemeal solutions such as design thinking or Scrum or business model generation. So we have the first end-to-end book thanks to those models, and this is what this book is really making a difference. So you can pick up the book anywhere at wiley.com, at Amazon, at any store you like, etc. And you can get the models on our website at digitalleadership.com. They are published open source, so feel free to get those and download those. And feel free as well to connect with me. I love speaking with other entrepreneurs, with corporate executives, to discuss what their innovation struggles are and to see, how we can help and learn, basically. That is always great and interesting talks. So feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Yeah, you'll find me there.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that information. And folks, if you are thinking about innovating, you have the expertise right here. Take some time, connect with Stefan and get his books, because as we talk through our conversation today, it's important to have those processes mature and think differently than what has been thinking, because Stefan, as you mentioned, that even though we have lean startups, 90% of businesses are failing. So it's important to put in that time up front. So as we wrap up our show, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Well, I think Innovation, we can't prevent change, we can only shape it. And so I would really like to invite you to create change in a way that improves the world around us. Let's unite, let's create a world worth living in. Let's do some positive change out there. We owe it to ourselves, to our families, to our companies, and to the world at large. So be invited to leverage better processes, and let's create a world worth living in, one innovation at a time.
Well, thank you, Stefan, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. And thank you, listeners, for being part of our family, because without you, the show would not be possible. And I know that you lead the change. Keep those emails coming to us. And I know several of you are connected with me on social media. Reach out, continue sharing your thoughts, because it helps us make our podcast richer and bring you back more value. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Be well and take care.
All the best.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.